Since 1965, the ACEC Life Health Trust has provided innovative healthcare benefits and services to ACEC member firms. We offer a variety of benefits to meet the unique needs of your firm, including fully insured, level funded, stop loss, and ancillary products. Visit our website at aceclifehealthtrust.com to learn more about our affordable employee benefit options for ACEC member firms, backed by the financial strength of the ACEC Life Health Trust. Welcome to Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. And today, we are putting a spotlight on some recent projects that were award winners in our Engineering Excellence program, especially our most recent awards in 2022 that just wrapped in the end of May. It was great to finally be back in person for those awards. And today, we're looking at the Kalispell Core and Rail Redevelopment Project in beautiful Kalispell, Montana. Really just the gateway to Glacier National Park. It is just one of those fantastic places that's unique and truly American. If you want to see unspoiled nature, and if you want to see you have to be there to actually understand exactly how beautiful this area of the country is. It is just truly, truly God's country. And this is a project that was really designed to accentuate that and to help the city and the town of Kalispell and its continued development. And to talk about this, we're very pleased to be welcoming Catherine King. She is the Assistant Director of Community and Economic Development for the city of Kalispell, and Mark Roeder. He's the civil engineer who worked on the project with KLJ. And joining the conversation is also our very own Chris Grindler, who is our Director of Marketing. And Chris, I'm going to kick it back over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. So Catherine and Mark, let's talk about the project. Let's dive right in. So it was the Kalispell Core and Rail Redevelopment Project. So can you just kind of paint a picture for our listeners so they really understand the full scope and what went into the build?
So the project in general really is two phases. It's about removing the historical railroad tracks that bifurcated the city because while the railroad developed Kalispell exists because of the railroad. At some point, of course, growth leapfrogged around that, and it became a kind of a chokehold on the city, if you will. So when we at one time had maybe 3 dozen businesses that were being served by the railroad, we in the 2000s got to a point where we were down to just 2, and yet here was this historic industrial use cutting through the middle of town. So the project was to move that rail use outside the city, just to the edge of the city, and then come back and reuse that space. We actually were able to acquire the BNSF right of way and turn that into basically a rails to trail project through rail banking. So that's the 2 phases. That's kind of the short version of the what. I would say if we want to get around to the pieces about how, a lot of that was really some important pieces were public engagement, really very robust public engagement, planning, partnerships, and perseverance. I mean, this was a 12-year project.
I mean, looking at this is a $25 million long-term project with a lot of stakeholders. We're looking at this. It's not only the city of Kalispell, but the Flathead County Economic Development Authority, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, BNSF, WATCO, CHS Incorporated, US EPA, DOT, US Economic Development Administration. And how do you talk about that public investment and public engagement work? I mean, how were you able to get all of these varying agencies on the same page and of course the community to buy in and support this project along the way? I mean, what was that process like?
So I think you really have to go back to where we started in 08. 09, 10, Kalispell, like much of the country, was feeling the effects of the Great Recession. We were just beginning at the city learning about brownfields and how that EPA Brownfields program was a opportunity for us, because we, like many other communities, have lots of brownfield sites. And so how do we address that? And at the same time, our partner in this community, Flathead County Economic Development Authority, FACETA, had been working for over 20 years trying to find place to build a rail park and being able to bring new businesses to this valley, which is really remote, right? We didn't quite say that earlier, but we're 120 miles from the nearest interstate. And so it's a beautiful part of the world, but it's off the beaten path. And so business doesn't get here by accident, and we have to work to make sure that we build and create those access points to markets outside of this community. So we really, I think, started with a 2010 EPA, Brownfields Area-Wide Planning grant. That was a pilot program at the time. That's what got us started with the core area plan. That core area plan was the absolute foundation, critical piece to making this project successful. The core area is that railroad corridor, so fancy name. And we had about 1,100 parcels, 450 property owners in that 365-acre area. As we went through this planning process, the city took a really concerted effort towards working with the community and asking what they wanted to see happen. And so, in fact, of those 450 property owners, give or take, we met one-on-one with 139 of them. Wow. What do you like? What could be better? What can we do? Should we stay out of your way? Give us some direction about what you see. And it was amazing how time and again, people had the same answers. It was time for the tracks to go. They wanted a greener, more walkable community. And really, regardless of their place in life, so from seniors who were saying, look, I can imagine a day when I want to stay independent. I want to live independently. I want to be able to walk to restaurants and grocery stores, but I don't want to live out in the country and need a car. Or younger folks who were coming and wanted sort of that more urban lifestyle in town, and yet the beauty of being in the Flathead is you're just 20 minutes, half an hour from pretty spectacular wilderness areas. So it was amazing to hear really consistently from folks in this community about those priorities. And then that led us, once the core area plan was adopted, based on those comments from our community, that led us to applying to the USDOT Tiger program, and third time, right? It took us 3 times to get that grant, but that $10 million is really the basis that allowed us to carry out the goals of the plan. Mark and I are fortunate. We've been around since the beginning of this project, and there were Tom Jentz was with the planning department here at the time, and Kim Morisaki was with Flathead Community.
Flathead County Economic Development Authority.
Thank you.
Yep.
I can't say it anymore. And so, but yet, of course, over the period of 12 years, it's really been a marathon or a relay race, if you will. And so we kind of keep passing the torch, and so many people have been a part of it and made it successful. And I think that's pretty encouraging as well, to see that there's so many chances for people to become involved and be part of making a really important difference in our community.
Transforming the community. And if I may build on what we talked about for the core area plan, it really was the basis that made, as you were asking the question about how do we get all those agencies together, with the core area plan and the amount of participation by the public and businesses in downtown and their vision of what they wanted with the Tiger Grant, it was that much easier to go to BNSF, WATCO, all the other agencies that we're working with, NDT, all these other agencies, and said, look, here's a project that people want. They've spoken. This is what the vision they have for Kalispell, and we have the funding. Now we just need your help to make what the community wants come to fruition.
Yeah, it's amazing what can happen when you actually get all these people together on board. You hear what they would want to see, how they want their community to develop, and you present that plan to, as a comprehensive answer to agencies, and then they're going to be more willing to take advantage of that. Some of the work that was done on the Brownfields area, I mean, that was looking at some of the remediation that was done. You had a kind of a mix of things you had to tackle. I mean, not just petroleum and hydrocarbons, but then also PCBs, asbestos, paint, lead-based paint, arsenic. You had issues related to past mining activity, the railroad activity, soil groundwater issues. I mean, from an engineering perspective, how did you tackle that? How did you say, okay, this is how we're going to actually look and deal with these environmental impacts?
Did you want to talk about the folks that you have on board that you can work with on a regular basis for those areas?
There's probably a couple ways to approach this question. And so from my role, I think part of it was recognizing, we brought Brownfields dollars to bear early on because there was a old gravel pit, so a played out open pit mine is what it's technically called. And it happened, by the way, to be immediately adjacent and somewhat overlapping a state Superfund site. I don't know if we mentioned that earlier. And tide treatment is nasty stuff, right? So dealing with that, and some of that property was privately owned and some of it was owned by DNRC. And then there was the piece, of course, that was railroad owned, and then there was a piece that the gravel pit owned. And so all of that was it was kind of just a big ball of twine, I guess. It was kind of all wadded up. But we were able to sort of just peel that layer, one layer at a time, peel that onion and address the remediation that was needed, work with the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. EDA actually had funded a grant for $1 million to our partner Faceta because they were trying to buy, as I said earlier, property where they could build access to the rail to get product in and out of this remote area. Well, Faceta was about to have to return that money to EDA because they were having so much trouble finding a place to land. The city was able to say, hey, we're aware of this played out gravel pit. It's right on the edge of the city. This might be a great place. By the way, the railroad tracks go right by and there's already a spur into it. So let's see if we can make that happen. Let's note that it's only 44 acres. And so in the world, generally, when you're going to build an industrial rail park, we all know that 44 acres with 28 of it being developable is probably not ideal. But a lot of this is about making lemonade, right? We as a community recognized that we needed to do the best we could. And the best we could do was find this spot. And so working together with EPA and with DEQ and with property owners, we were able to do it. But let me have Mark speak to it from an engineering.
Sure. Yeah, from an engineer standpoint, it made it easy that we had that core area plan and we had the support of these agencies. And I think they saw the vision of what Kalispell could be. And we had some local folks from DEQ and BNSF here that were motivated to make the project happen. So on our side, for engineering standpoint, it was easy to identify what each agency, their critical issues were and how we would work around it. I.e., we had monitoring wells that we had to maintain and make sure that they were maintained and that it could still be used for their continued work below ground for the Superfund site. Along the trail downtown, the city had worked with several brownfields contractors to identify the areas of issue, and then while we were constructing it, we had protocols if we came into, which we did in areas where there was some suspect soils, but we had all that groundwork laid out, and we had agencies that were willing to work with us and help us identify the pitfalls. So we avoided a lot of issues before we even went to construction. I think that was the key, is that we had support from the agencies, and we had identified most of the pitfalls before we went to construction.
So clearly, a lot of work went into this project, 12 years. some challenges came up that you worked through, obviously, right? And at this point, is the community taking it in and said, hey, are they actively engaging with the new project, with what's been built, the core area, I guess is what it's called, right?
It really started really with the downtown trail and complete street, because the Glacier Rail Park was great, but we're mostly working with the business and folks because it was kind of out of sight of town. It wasn't really sexy, as it were. But when we got down to the trail, that's when the public really jumped in and wanted to see. We had a week long, we call it deep dive. And during that week long deep dive, we had a great suggestion from the manager of Watco. He was in contact with folks that had speeder cars. These are the older cars that in the past they would run up and down the rails, checking the rails, doing inspections. Well, folks now refurbish those and they run them along the trail. Well, we had 8 or 9 of them.
So those are hobbyists.
These are hobbyists. We had about 8 or 9 of those that they came down, and we ran up and down the 1.6 miles downtown with folks, with the public. So they can get a bird's eye view from the trail on what it might look like from walking the trail eventually. And after we had them, actually had, I think, over 100 folks run up and down the trail with those speeder cars. After they came off, we gave them a survey to ask them their thoughts on the trail, which worked out great. We got some great comments on what did the public want to see once the rail was done.
And I think this is an important point to stop at, because, your average community member wasn't walking the tracks. So they really, we talked about pull up the tracks and put in a trail, but they didn't know what they were going to be getting. I mean, they didn't hang out at the tracks. So it was an amazing event. And in fact, I will say it was almost dangerous, because people had so much fun riding those speeder cars that day that there was a little bit of, a few suggestions. Can we keep the tracks and keep going on these rides on these little speeder cars? So there was a little risk in that event, but nonetheless. And I think, and maybe this is jumping back a little bit, but one of the things overall, I mean, this was a 12-year project. We're doing a ribbon cutting on July 21st, right? So we're just about to do the ribbon cutting on the now we named it the park line. And getting to that point wasn't just about the early work, and it wasn't, I guess what I want to say is it wasn't ever just a one-time touch with the community or with the agencies. Over those 12 years, it has been a critical piece to continue communicating with our partners, trying to keep us all kind of our arms linked together, and herding the cats. Well, that's kind of what this is. Also helping folks remember you're being really successful, keep at this, because 12 years is a long time, and people forget. And then also reaching out within the community. So whenever a business group would invite us, or the Elks or the Eagles or whatever animal club you had, or the Rotary, whenever they'd invite us, we would go and speak and present about where we are in the process, and give them updates, because otherwise it's really hard to keep that momentum going. And as Mark said, you had to first build a rail park, and then you had to move to businesses, no small thing, let them get built, new facilities, then you can come back and start to tear out the old stuff. Well, until just a year and a half ago, people were still asking, are you really going to build that trail? Well, I mean, we knew it, we did, but once in a while, someone new comes along, or it's been a long time and they haven't heard that, for whatever reason, they hadn't heard about it. And you have to say, oh my goodness, yes, I promise you that trail is going to get built. But that communication, I think, is really a critical component to keeping up the challenge.
Yeah, I think that, going back to just how extensive the project is, right? Because when you do cut that ribbon later on this month, the park line trail is going to connect essentially to 11 miles of existing other rails of trails around it within Flathead County, westward and 7 miles to the south. So 11 miles west, 7 to the south. And then you have the connection to the east on another trail system, which could connect that to Glacier. So essentially you could take a trail from Kalispell directly to Glacier. So you think about what that brings from a recreational tourist industry aspect of how you could, because, well, even though you're talking about some interesting distances and some challenging environment, I mean, that's what a lot of people live for, is that trail network, to be able to, just take that right into the national park. Um, I mean, how has that been? What are you expecting from, I guess, an economic development standpoint, just once that is open and available to people?
Well, it's even before it's even open, connecting to the east, we're already seeing a great influx of private development and critical development that we need here in Kalispell. So we like to throw out the figures of, this was a $40 million public-private partnership to get the trail and the park built. We've already seen over $200 million of private investment coming into downtown, converting roughly 45 acres of undeveloped or underdeveloped property along the core area. And that includes critical housing that in the valley we're dire need. It's just like across the United States, but really critical here in downtown Kalispell for apartment complexes. And now this trail allows, as Catherine mentioned earlier, availability of folks that maybe don't have cars to reach food, groceries, medical care, right downtown without having to walk along a street or across a street in downtown Kalispell.
And I think that safety component is going to be felt, and it's really important. So sometimes we forget how many of our community members aren't driving, for various reasons. It might be for physical health reasons. It might be they're just not old enough yet. It might be that you don't want my 99-year-old grandmother driving anymore. But for all sorts of reasons, we have lots of folks, and in the Flathead, it's a big thing. We do have winter, so vehicles need to be safe for winter driving, and that's expensive. So this really is an opportunity for us to broaden our access to amenities to everyone in this community, certainly within the town of Kalispell proper, but also reaching out to what you would say, I guess, is amenities that are recreational amenities as well. So, but that safety piece and making sure that pedestrians and bicyclists are removed from the vehicular path is an important piece, and we're really pleased about that. There are so many wins in this project, you sort of run out of fingers to count them on.
That's what we like to hear. I'm going to ask one more thing before I kick it over to Chris. I don't want to hog the mic here, but it's just out of curiosity. I mean, with the recent, everybody's been looking at the recent weather effects of the storms and just the rain affecting, the entire area near Glacier. Did the rains affect the project at all, or was it left unscathed?
It actually was really beneficial for us. We put out most of our plants this spring and seeded, and now instead of having basically a corridor of 100 feet of gravel and ballast material, we now have a greenscape through town.
There you go.
Fantastic.
Almost 100 feet wide in many places. Yeah, so it helped us out. We were just lucky enough that we had great weather last year. We got a lot of work done, a lot more than we thought we would get done last year, and we're really looking forward to the opening. We've got a nice greenscape through the town of Kalispell.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So outside of what we've talked about with the brownfield sites and how the community has responded, are there any other challenges or new innovations that you'd like to highlight from the project that you found or you discovered?
I think one that we did is, and it's new up here in Kalispell. We did have a concrete contractor that basically poured the trail using a machine that basically formed the 12-foot wide trail right through town. So instead of having to go out there and use traditional forms, and they just basically sort of went in and worked to the other area and formed the trail all the way through. So that helped us out a lot last year in getting the trail done basically within 2 weeks, which would have been months of forming and pouring concrete in sections. And that worked out really well. That was probably one of the bigger innovations that came for this project here.
I don't know how innovative it is, and it's certainly not a technical piece, but I would mention that there was a lot of skepticism in this community. I mean, for this community to get a $10 million grant, I'm not sure we'd ever seen one before.
For a community of 20,000 people.
Yeah. 20,000 people here, right? I don't know that we'd ever seen $10 million grant before. And then we, as a community, the city actually, in the end, when it came to finally finishing off that trail, I mean, the city put in many millions also into the 10 million range, more than that actually, which, a lot of folks back in 2015 when we finally got a Tiger grant, didn't see that happening. I mean, and so we actually partnered TIF dollars, tax increment financing dollars, with money that came from BNSF and WACO, and then against the Tiger grant and the EPA and EDA. So all of those pieces came together, the traditional layer cake that we talk about. But the other thing that I think is really important is you have to get over some of that skepticism of, well, we can't do it. It's never been done before. I mean, we have a mall, like many communities do, that was built in 1985. And at that time, they wanted to put it right in the center of town, and the tracks were there. So they tried to get rid of the tracks, and they were able to get the tracks pushed north half a block. So when you come in, the mid 2010, let's say, and you say, well, we're going to try to pull the tracks out of town completely. We're going to keep them because we recognize that that's a critical component. We want to keep our businesses, but we just don't want to keep the track where it was. People would actually said to us, actually councilmen said, if it hasn't been done in 30 years, it can't be done. And so that's something to get over as a community, is to believe in yourself. And I admit to beginning to call myself a zealot. Like, I was like, okay, I'm a believer in our community and in this project. And you need the technical piece, you need the innovations, and we needed the engineering that KLJ brought along for us, and Mark in particular. And at the same time, the technical piece isn't enough. You have to have the hearts of people to believe in themselves and in their communities, and that this investment will work, and that it's important, and that they can do it and be successful. And so we're only just beginning to see the fruits of all of that work.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we like to hear. I mean, it's an example of when you take a client with an idea and drive and the willingness to kind of do something that hasn't been done before, and you tie that with an engineer who is willing to take innovative steps to accomplish that goal, that you can result in something which is unexpected and can have a massive impact on a community in ways that at the start weren't even considered. Right? You can have this thing where you might have a goal of dealing with brownfields, about dealing with this track that's been an issue, but still maintaining all of the economic activity within a community, enhancing that activity and creating new opportunities. So there's a reason why this project was awarded at the state level with Montana ACEC at their own EEA awards, and of course as a National Recognition Award winner at the national awards, because it's that example of engineering excellence. Chris, what else do you have?
No, I think this has been a great discussion. I don't really have any other questions. Catherine, Mark, anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't covered?
If I may,
Sure.
I just think that for 120 years, the railroad established and built and maintained Kalispell. For the downtown location, we saw the end of BNSF or the railroad's influence. it's picked up with the new rail park. We're hoping that this new trail downtown will continue to spur economic development downtown for the next 100 years. And initially, we're seeing that come to fruition. And so I think that's, for Catherine and I, hopefully I can speak for Catherine, it's been an immense pleasure and honor to be able to be part of a project that's transforming Kalispell, that I think the legacy will be here for the next 100 years.
I guess for my part, I would say this project has been a gift. I mean, a gift to us as a community, to find that we, with all our, I mean, it's a small town, but we still have lots of our differences, and yet we could come together with a shared goal, and we could work for a very long time to make it happen, and overcome those differences and doubts and challenges, and there were many. And now, I mean, it just puts a smile on my face every time I drive across or I get anywhere near that Parkline Trail, and to see people using it, even when it wasn't quite open, that's okay. I just can't help but smile every time I see it, and I am so proud of our community and happy to have been a part of that, and to have gotten to work with some really amazing people. That was a gift to me personally.
Well, the future is certainly bright in Kalispell, Montana. And thank you both, Mark and Catherine, for joining us. This has been another episode of the Engineering Influence podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. We'll catch you next time.